tucked away beside the main highway in Plimmerton, just north of New Zealand's capital Wellington, is a collection that not many people know about. In fact, it's the largest private collection of mainline steam locomotives in the world, and it's the achievement of one man. Let's take a look around and find out why. This story started a long time ago.
For many young boys, their introduction to railways was with a toy train set. Ian Welch was no exception, receiving his first toy train at the age of 2.
Yeah, I think my first recollections of trains, if you like, was my father, when I was 2 years old, bought a Lionel train set. It was Union Pacific yellow. I can vividly, in fact I've still got the model. It's funny how the colour yellow comes into it, because I've been an avid Union Pacific fan all my life. Probably the biggest railway in America. Very innovative railway, always had big engines, and I think it goes back to my boyhood with that first streamlined passenger train running around the Christmas tree at 2 years old. It subsequently came up in life later on, at about probably 96, I think it was. I was over in England and met up with Sir William McAlpine, who resurrected the Flying Scotsman or saved it from America. And I was at his home in Fawley Estates, just out of London. And we're walking around looking at his collection of various items, and we just walked past his collection of Rolls-Royce cars, 5 of them I think were sitting there. He turned around to me and he said, Ian, he said, how long have you been interested in steam? And I said, oh goodness, Sir William, I really don't know. I think I must have been born with it. And he leaned over and patted me on the shoulder and he said, good chap, he said, good chap, one of us, definitely one of us. So I really felt quite elated with that. I thought that was high praise coming from someone like Sir William, who was probably at the epitome of rail preservation in the UK. So yeah, that's where it first started, with that train set as a 2-year-old. My parents, when I was young, lived at Miramar, and but at the age of 4 we moved out to Stokes Valley. In fact, you know, like when I was 4 years old, we moved to Stokes Valley. Very rural in those days. This was 1943. The American base was there, the armoured base with the tanks, and I can remember them running up and down the main road, which is a gravel road, Stokes Valley at that time. My father used to drive the car off the road. You certainly had to give way to the tanks. At the age of 4, by that time my grandfather had retired and moved into Gisborne. So my mother used to, in school holidays at Christmas time, we would go to Gisborne, and of course we went by train. The line hadn't been opened very long. I think it opened virtually at the start of the war, around that period. That leads on to another story, my passion for steam. My grandfather came out from Scotland on my mother's side as chief engineer for the Hicks Bay Freezing Works, which I believe closed fairly soon after he arrived. He then moved down to Tokomaru Bay and was chief engineer at the Tokomaru Bay Freezing Works. Of course, they had a little railway there, which I can't remember, but I've obviously seen photos of it. But I was christened at Tokomaru Bay. But what was interesting to me, my father used to drive us down to the bottom of Stokes Valley. We'd walk across a swing bridge, it was a walking bridge across the Hutt River, and we'd catch a train at Haywood Station. It was usually powered by a tank locomotive, a WAB or a WW class, which would take us into Wellington, where the train to Napier would be waiting. That was powered in those days by an ED electric, which took us from Wellington Station out to Paikokariki. Paikokariki, there used to be at least 6 KAs, and if we were lucky, or if I was lucky, there would be some streamline ones there. Hence my love of streamline KAs. The KAs at that stage were streamlined. The other engines were K-class. And there used to be usually one AB there, which was doing the shunting. And of course, being a young kid at the time, I would go up and have a look at the steam engine, being ever curious as you are as a young person. But of course, then the steam engine would let out steam out of its snifters and out of its cylinder cocks. And of course, I'd tear away, absolutely terrified. And then the fascination would get at me again, and off I'd go and have another look. And there was tea rooms at Paikakariki. One normally stopped and my mother got a cup of tea and a drink for me, and the next thing we're off behind these magnificent streamlined KAs to Napier.
This was in a period when train travel was the main way of getting around in New Zealand. And of course it had the added benefit of seeing the countryside, especially during holiday periods.
So this was 2 school holidays, I think May and August were the 2 school holidays, and of course often at Christmas time. So I did a lot of travelling behind steam, behind KAs, from Wellington to Napier, and then a smaller engine would take over, normally an AB and an A, or 2 ABs, usually double heading, because there's normally 14 cars on the train, may have been more. And these were the old wooden cars with the balconies. And they were good. You could open the windows, and you were allowed to stand out in the balconies, and you got a great view, particularly going over the Mohoka Viaduct all the way to Gisborne. Very, very scenic route.
These early interactions with railways created a very big impression on a very young Ian.
These depot buildings represent a lifetime of achievement. But of course, they were shaped by many influences early on.
I was told by my parents from day one, I was an adopted child. I guess the only factor there was I ended up being an only child. Not sure if that's good or bad. One characteristic of that, of course, being an only child, I think it makes one very determined. You become very objective in what you want to do and very determined to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Now, whether that's the fact that I was an only child or whether that's my personality, I really can't answer that question. In those days, there was an awful lot of adopted children at school. I would suggest that probably a third of the children at school were adopted children, so nothing very unusual about it. I put it down to the fact that in those days there wasn't the birth control available for our female population there is today, so I guess I've got to count my blessings and say I'm very lucky to be here. I met my birth mother. Unfortunately, this was after my father died, and one of the children of my birth mother, half-sister, got in contact with me. But I did not meet my birth father. I know of him and who he is, and I've subsequently met the family. And I've got on that side three brothers and a sister, who I'm very fond of, and it's been very nice, yeah. Went to school at, was only one primary school in Stokes Valley at the time, and I did my primary schooling there to Standard 6, became head prefect, and from there I went to Hutt Valley High School in the third form and went through to the sixth form at Hutt Valley High. My careers advisor suggested I should become a salesman. They thought that would be a good career. So I joined Smith & Smith's mainly in the hardware, paint, wallpaper, glass, that type of thing, and eventually went out on the road calling on builders and selling for them. Then later in life I then joined probably an exclusive agency, a company that handled, they were a sales rep company, small one, and I worked for them for about 3 or 4 years. And one of our products we had at the time was Diamond Industries, were just starting, and I got invited by Diamonds to join them as their sole salesperson on a commission basis. I think the first year I earned too much commission, so they decided they'd better put me on a salary. By this time, Gloria and I had had 4 children, and we were any thought of trains after I got married really had to be put to one side. Establishing a home and a family was more important.
Ian has not always been able to indulge in his railway interests, especially while his family were growing up. I'm here now with one of Ian's daughters, Joanne, to give me a little bit of insight into his family's perspective.
Yes, Bethany, it was a different perspective. Growing up with a very, very passionate father was interesting at times.
Yeah.
As an adult now, and I'm speaking on behalf of all of my family, like I've got 2 sisters, Julie, the oldest one, Sharon, then myself, and unfortunately not my brother, who died at 25, is not here with us, but definitely his perspective as well. Yes, Dad was such a driven man. He was so deeply passionate, and we probably resented it at times, to be fair, but now that we're all adults, we totally respect and admire what he's achieved in his life.
Can you go a little bit deeper into what it was like growing up with someone with such a focused, deep passion?
Well, I think it taught us all that you can do whatever you want to do in life. You know, the sky's the limit. But there was also, we also could see the price that sometimes you do pay for when you do have something that you're deeply passionate about. I have to say, as an adult, I'm quite envious that Dad has had this really deep passion to drive him through his life. And I think that's something to, you know, that's a treasure to have such a deep passion in life, to find something that you feel that wonderful about. So a blessing for my father, I believe. As young children, we're all self-centred. We wanted Dad to have ponies and go on boat trips and all that sort of fun thing. Instead, we had men coming around talking about nuts and bolts, and railway stations were sooty, dirty places for girls.
Yeah.
I mean, it really just wasn't what 3 young girls really envision as being a good time. And even my brother kind of resisted it when he was really young, but growing up and when he became an adult, he totally embraced it and loved it in the end, and was just as deeply passionate about steam engine and restoring steam engines. In fact, he was almost driving it by the time that he turned 25 and just before he passed away.
Wow, that must have been a massive thing for the family to deal with.
Yeah, it was. It really was heart-wrenching for my father, to have his right-hand man and his son there alongside him. They were just best of mates in the end. He was a lovely man, and I was very close to him as well. So yeah, it was deeply tragic for our family.
Yeah. When we were talking earlier, I remember you saying about how your father was so focused, but on the other side was also a really kind person to the whole family. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that side?
Yes. So Dad could be quite difficult, because he was so driven, and he couldn't understand why as young children we wanted to play more, and he wanted us, he worked us pretty hard.
Right.
So that was hard, but then when the chips were down or any time in your life, Dad was always there. And not just for us as a family, throughout his whole entire life he's reached out. So I think, he's very philanthropic about his steam engine restoration, but he's also taken people on the journey with him. He's a very strong leader, and he's reached out and helped people at times of need.
That's really special. Do you have any special memories about steam train experiences growing up?
Well, I'd like to give you one from when I think we were all aged between 13 to 15. And this is something that we've actually still not forgiven our father for. we were on a holiday. So our holidays, Dad was very adventurous. Our holidays, so we were fortunate in some respects, because every 3-4 weeks of the year we would tour New Zealand. But that actually, so it was great. We got to see so much of New Zealand, but that generally meant that we were sort of touring sooty railway yards. But anyway, one particular time, it was a New Year's Eve, and we'd all found some really nice, well, they were boys, surfers, and they had a tent right next door to our caravan. So there's 3 young girls aged between 13 and 15.
Wild.
15, because there's 1 year between us all. And there was this big party that was going to happen that night at the motor camp. And Dad packed us up, crying and carrying on like we did. We even tried to run away. And made us go off and spend New Year's Eve in a sooty railway yard in the caravan, watching Max cry, and if you can remember Max cry, drinking lemonade, and we all cried. Well, so we haven't forgiven him for that.
I can totally imagine. I would have done the same thing, I'm sure.
Now as adults we can understand why we want to take 3 young girls away from a tent load full of boys, but you know,
Absolutely.
there you go. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yes, no, it was all about steam engines and soot and whatever. So we didn't appreciate his hobby on that particular night, that particular New Year's Eve at all. But now we had some amazing adventures with our father. I was fortunate enough to ride in a cab from Christchurch right through Arthur's Pass, which is so beautiful in the middle of winter, all the way to Greymouth. In the cab, you know, just spectacular scenery, and health and safety wasn't what it was then, so it was just amazing. So all of us managed to have some incredible railway journeys with our dad, and he's got a very adventurous spirit as well.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, because I, of course, went on Mainline Steam's most recent excursion, and wow, that incredible exhilaration that you feel when you're in the cab or even close to the cab, that whole monstrous locomotive exhilaration is really a moving kind of experience. So getting to do that in a whole different time where you say everything was looser, there wasn't so much constraint with the health and safety, and you could really get that feeling of being alive on it. I can just imagine how amazing that must have felt.
A powerful experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I can understand the attraction my father has had to steam engines. When you actually are riding in a cab, it's pretty exhilarating. I agree.
You were telling me earlier about how the whole family is so proud of your dad's achievements compared to when you were growing up and didn't necessarily understand the whole picture.
I guess what you touched on was that we did have a blind spot when we were children. We didn't realise, and we had no idea the massive undertaking our father was doing and what he was doing for history. And so with that, now there's huge family support for Dad as adults. You know, we saved a lot of steam engines, and we want to see that carry on into the future as a family. We're very united in that. We'd love to see them all stay together, maybe a museum of some kind, and just completely getting behind, you know, steam engine excursions so that people can come from all over the world, and also Kiwis from all over New Zealand can experience the wonder of steam that my father's managed to save.
That's really cool. I can totally imagine, because it's a lot of the achievement is in the wonder of the restoration, keeping something going that could have just been historic. So I think, you know, creating a museum around it and trying to bring in more audience is a really great vision.
It's hard to know really what that vision will undertake, because Dad has been such a huge driving force and such a strong leader. I guess we're just so supportive of it. How that will play out, I have no idea, but I really hope that it carries on in a very positive way for New Zealand.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for giving so much insight into your family perspective. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you for allowing our family to have some input.
Ian's fascination with steam was reawoken when New Zealand Railways started to replace their ageing steam locomotives with diesels.
Well, mainline steam, I guess the genesis of where it started was back in 1969 when then New Zealand Railways were getting rid of steam. And another friend of mine, Reed McNaught, and I, we met at the Greymouth Roundhouse, was a roundhouse in those days, and discussed the habituary to steam, and decided it was time that we should try and do something about it. Reed's the editor of Railfan magazine. He was doing a PhD at Victoria University at the time I met him. But I met him in 1970, I think it was. In 1969, I went up behind another last steam train. This was KB 968. By that time, I'd got the bug for. I'd obviously always been keen on steam, but I'd never been married. I didn't have the opportunity, but realising that this was really the end of steam, and the children had grown up by then, well, reasonably, they were teenagers. I had the time and a bit of money to be able to do those trips. And I've travelled the world quite a bit now, and I've been to Switzerland and been to South America. So I've been on a lot of various steam trips and tourist railways, and I still rate Arthur's Pass, or Christchurch Arthur's Pass, as one of the top trips in the world. We wrote to the railways at the time, and unfortunately, we felt, we were keen on steam, and it just seemed too good to, particularly the trip from Christchurch to Arthur's Pass, and it's more exciting behind a steam engine than a diesel. And it just seemed to me, seeing these engines being cut up, that there was an opportunity being lost, an opportunity for New Zealand and New Zealanders. I and a few of my friends just had to be keen on these magnificent mainline steam engines. Belch smoke and snort and hiss and roar as they go up the grades.
Ian's growing enthusiasm was exemplified in a short national film unit production made in 1967.
My first interest in the Midland Line was when I was quite young schoolboy at Auckland Grammar, and I went down to the South Island with some friends, and we went to the West Coast in 1960. And we travelled across the Midland Line on the Greymouth Express, a holiday relief express at that time. And I first came across the KBs actually waiting in the sidings, and we went past them. I thought these huge engines, they were very impressive. And I'd seen some movies that Dawson Wilkinson had taken. He'd been down there in the late 50s and started filming these things. And later on, when I joined the National Film Unit, one of the first assignments that I got, my first location job, was as a director to make the movie KB Country in August 1967 for the pictorial parades. There was a 10-minute black and white film, and we spent 3 weeks making that. It really had to be done then or never, because the KBs were probably not going to last much longer, because these locomotives belonged there. They fitted, they were elemental machines. They had a sort of a presence in the mountains which gave you the impression that they'd been there forever. The movie turned out to be very successful, partly because Brian Cross, who was a top cameraman, got right in amongst all the action and with the telephoto lens, and also we did tracking shots through the Broken River Gorge ahead of a KB on a jigger, and did all sorts of crazy things which people would never be able to do today. We could never have got permission from the railways to do what we did. By the time we'd shot it, that was the old principle, was you shoot now, answer questions later. You didn't go and get permission. So that's why the movie proved to be quite successful, because we actually took risks to get the movie made while it could be made. And of course, the following year, not long after it was shown throughout New Zealand in the Kerridge Odeon network, the KB ceased to exist. So the timing of the movie and its screening at the Embassy Theatre, for example, I went to see it on the big screen. And the Embassy Theatre was very impressive with this KB 970 coming at you. It was really quite impressive sort of stuff, and it was so sad that not more than 8 weeks after the movie was seen in New Zealand, throughout New Zealand, the KB's finished. I first got to know Ian Welch on one of those trips, one of the very final trips with the KB locomotives on the Springfield Arthur's Pass line. It'd be about 1970, I think it was. It was right at the very end of steam, and there are only two or three, I think two more KBs left at that stage. The others had been sidelined or retired. And it sparked off his interest, obviously, maybe just in time, because he had the wherewithal, the interest and the passion, to take the preservation of these big mainline steam engines into far greater depths than I could ever have done as a student, a university student, a schoolboy earlier on.
There were also many other rail enthusiasts who had been just as stirred up by the loss of steam locomotives.
At the local branch of the Railway Locomotive Society invited me down. This was the last steam trip apparently in New Zealand. It was a KB going up to Arthur's Pass and then through the Aotearoa Tunnel, and another train taking us through to Greymouth, overnighting at Greymouth. We went up the Riuanui incline, which is now ceased or was not functioning anymore. This was a little coal mining line. And then the following day we came back. What was memorable about it was we went down on the steamship, I think the Rangatira, overnight on the Friday. Saturday morning we got off and the train was waiting for us at Littleton Wharf. We then went up to Arthur's Pass. It was KB 970. We then got taken through the Aotearoa Tunnel with electric locomotives, and then an AB was put on at Aotearoa and took us through to Greymouth. At Greymouth at 5 o'clock, we arrived at 5. At 6 o'clock, we had a tank engine pull a small train from Greymouth Station up the Riuanui incline, which was a fell system rather like the Rimataka incline, except for the locomotives didn't use it, but it was the third rail was there for braking of the coal trains coming down the hill. The next day we had 2 A-class engines at Greymouth to take us back to Christchurch, 428 and 423. Both locomotives have been saved, fortunately. The AB that took us, I can't recall the number, but I know that got cut up. And unfortunately KB 970 got cut up, which had a profound effect. That led to another part of the story. So we wrote to the railways and asked them if they'd consider saving perhaps 6 engines, probably 2 or 3 for the North Island and 2 and 3 for the South Island, with the view that weekend excursions could carry on, for people to enjoy. We got a pretty derisory reply back. Made it very clear that the diesels were coming in, that they wanted a new image. I'm not sure how many times we've heard that before, but no, steam had no place in their new corporate structure, and it was all going to be bright and shiny and new, so no, they were going to definitely cut them all up.
One of the last batch of 110-ton JAs to be built takes her first look at the world outside the workshops. Meanwhile, in England, something new is on the stocks for the New Zealand railways. Heavy diesel electrics, power stations on wheels. Diesel motor drives the generator that makes the current that drives the axle motors. Not being suited to English gauge lines, the new locomotives can't go to the docks on their own wheels. Instead of railway signals, they pass the winking lights of pedestrian crossings. Arrived and on test on the main trunk, the first diesel-electric proves itself more powerful than an oil-burning KA and cuts costs by a third. With the coming of more efficient power, the JA, like other steam locomotives, will have to take a back seat.
My wife was into small bore rifle shooting. At the time was building a swimming pool at home, and one of the girls said her father was very keen to build a pool and he worked for the railways, could he come and see me and have a talk to me about it? So I said, yeah, no problem at all. So anyway, chap's name was Bill Hoare, lovely man. He worked in the Chief Mechanical Engineer's office. He was a mechanical engineer. Anyway, he came up and I told him about, I guess, the secrets of building a pool. Building a swimming pool is not straightforward. You're literally building a boat that's just sitting in the ground. After I finished telling him all about the pool, he said to me, I asked him, I said, what do you do in the railways? Oh, he said, I cut up steam, busy at the moment, cutting up steam engines. He said, we've got that many to cut up. And I said, oh my God. I said, the very things in life I'm passionate about, and here you are cutting them up. And he said, oh, do you want one? And I said, could I? And he said, oh yeah. Now, of course, bear in mind, I've been talking to Reid about obtaining a steam engine, but it was all talk at that stage. So anyway, so Bill said, yeah, he could allocate one to me, he could get one, as long as we could afford it. because I went to bed that night highly excited that we were going to buy a steam engine. But like a lot of life and reality in life, you wake up in the morning and suddenly you realise it's all very well buying a steam engine, but what are you going to do with it? Where are you going to put it? What responsibilities you're taking on? So in the cold light of day, wasn't quite so elated in the morning, but I think fairly determined that we should do something about it.
Little did Ian realise back in 1970 that buying a steam locomotive would be one of those defining moments that would grow and grow and change his life forever.
We eventually, after I think 16 years of not having steam, but unfortunate we had a general manager that was very stubborn and determined that there was going to be no steam on the main line. So we're actually, from a Western country point of view, we were the last Western country to actually get steam back on the main line. 16 years, whereas England had a steam ban for about 4 years.
The idea of restoring locomotives was already well established in Great Britain, with important projects such as the Tallyllyn Railway Preservation Society in North Wales in 1950.
These were the quarries of Bryn Eglwys. Men dug slate here, and they built their buildings of it, and they lived in them for 90 years. And then the slate gave out. Down below, the quarrymen had laid a railway to carry their slate out of the mountains to the sea. When the quarries closed, the Tallyllyn was about to be demolished. But a little band of enthusiasts showed up and objected. "It's too nice to scrap," they said. "Please, couldn't we have it instead?" And they could. An entire railway as a gift. They've been running it ever since, simply for the joy of it.
This was followed by the Bluebell Railway in West Sussex in 1960.
The future for a country railway line in the heart of Sussex looked bleak. British Railways had just closed the route. The station buildings were due to be pulled down, and the tracks were expected to be ripped up. Without the vision of 4 young students, the chances are demolition might well have happened, with the branch line now long forgotten. Instead, this award-winning line made history. It's credited as the pioneer of one section of the British railway heritage scene, moving preservation from solely narrow gauge to standard gauge railways. Had the UK's first volunteer-run standard gauge line not proven successful, then the 100 or so other standard gauge heritage railways within the British Isles today would probably never have entered preservation.
And finally, Alan Pegler got the very first privately owned steam locomotive back onto the main lines of Britain in 1963. By the time Ian was investigating buying his own mainline locomotive, many years had already passed since Alan had first paved the way.
The idea of a mainline express locomotive being bought privately to be run on British railways was one that caught the public imagination in a big way. Again and again, Alan Pegler, in his footplate finery, retold the story of how he came to save the lady of his dreams from a fate worse than death, ignominious dismissal to the scrap heap.
When I first became interested in steam trains, there was a general feeling amongst the preservation movement that we'd be lucky to get any steam engines saved at that particular time. And there was no expectations that anything would ever get saved for the future, like what you've got with Ian Welch now. And it was only in the mid-1960s that there was any concept or possibility that something might have got saved. But it wasn't until mid-late 60s that something was done about it. So when Ian Welch came along, the choices that he had to save locomotives were vastly limited. Fortunately, there was still enough left just in time of the big mainline locomotives for him to do something with what he could. He was a person who gave you the impression that he knew what he wanted to do. He had obviously had practical skills, which would have been needed. So I got the impression from Ian that he was quite serious in his saving one or two of these locomotives. I thought to myself, well, he's just the right kind of person you need to do it, because he was someone who gave you the impression of someone who got things done, unlike some society-type people who, with all the best will in the world, did a lot of talking but didn't get much action out of them. So when I got to know him a bit better, I heard that he had actually put the options on 1 or 2 locomotives and was looking around for what he could save at that particular time when things were getting desperately late in the piece. I thought, well, thank goodness we've got someone like Ian Welch.
In the end, it became evident if we're going to do anything, we'd have to buy a steam engine. So this is what we did, and then we had to find a home for it. Now that was the genesis of, I guess, steam back on the main line. So that goes back to 1969. We started negotiation with the railways to buy an engine around about 1970, and in that time, around that time period, Reed and I eventually bought AB 795, and though we actually paid for it and owned it, well, we thought we owned it, the railways took it back off us, and this is when the Queen came out to visit, and she expressed an interest that she'd like her children to be able to come to New Zealand to see steam, and with the Minister at the time, Gordon, the railways had resurrected 7 or 8 carriages, painted them a beautiful green in the old Pullman green, and they'd restored 2 locomotives, AB 795 and AB 778. You know, I was very lucky. I had a friend in the army, Colonel Val Brown, who lived up the road. Now, Val had been commandant of the Linton military camp. So I got hold of Val, said to him, any chance of storing this engine at the Linton military camp? And he said, oh, yeah, he said, the current Commodore or commander up there is a friend of mine. He said, I'll give him a ring, I'll come back to you. So duly I got a call from Val to say, yeah, no problem at all. Be very happy to store the engine up there, because at that time Linton, near Palmerston North, it was connected by rail. There was a siding up to Linton, quite a long siding, it was about 3 kilometres long. It's subsequently been disconnected and abandoned. But that was prior to Paikokariki. So we had resolved one problem, because the railways would sell us the engine on the basis that it had to be removed. Obviously we had to pay the money, but it had to be removed off railway property. And we weren't to expect to be able to run it on the main line. And of course that was very contrary to what Reed and I were doing. That's what we wanted to do, run it on the main line. And the suggestion was that if we made too much of a fuss, we mightn't be favoured with spare parts and things like that. So there was sort of while there was nothing in writing, there was sort of, the railways made it very clear that they were changing from steam to diesel. And while they were probably happy to sell the odd engine to groups like Ferrymead or Motat, and probably to Reed and I, it had to be on the basis that these were seen as museum pieces, not active working locomotives. My boss, Ted Houth at Diamonds, was into racehorses, and he had 2 very expensive stallions on his property, and he was using them for breeding purposes. The popular method of financing a stallion in those days was to syndicate it. And I had to talk to Reed. I felt the best thing to do to finance, because neither of us really had any money, was to syndicate the engine or sell shares in the engine, which we did. We missed, well, eventually, obviously we didn't get AB 795, so the railways offered us, they said we could buy some J-class engines from them.
Subsequently, after I met Ian, he and Reed McNaught, before that, attempted to buy an AB, which went to the Kingston Flyer instead, so the J's were the ones that were focused on as the most reliable, realistic preservation projects at the time. And between the group of people, I was one of them. There was quite a few of us, about 30 people altogether. We bought the 2 J locomotives. Ian bought a larger share of one of them, and the rest of us bought part shares in the other one, and I'm not sure how it all worked out, but between about 30 of us altogether, we managed to save 2 J locomotives, J1211 and J1234.
And so various rail fans, particularly around Wellington, I think that everyone put in $50, so that's how we bought it. As a result of having all these shareholders, we decided probably the best vehicle to look after the engine was to actually form a society and build the facilities we needed. And that's where we started STEM Incorporated at Paikokariki. Because obviously you've got an engine, but you need lathes, you need sheds, you need track, you need cranes. There's an awful lot of things you need with it. I guess the society evolved. We actually had a lot of help from Mayor Brown of Pairua, whose son Derek was very keen on what we're doing. and Mayor Brown was in the railways at the time. He suggested Paikokariki, vacant land out there not being used, and he thought it might be a good venue. Reed and I liked the idea, and that's really how Paikok came about. Well, by the time we got there, it was a greenfield site. The old depot had been pulled down. All that remained at Paikok was a few sidings and the turntable. So we started off from scratch. We managed to resurrect a couple of water vats from around the country up in the North Island, and brought them back to Paikokariki and resurrected them, and started to build a shed, and which is there today. They were demolishing a shed at the hut shops, which had beautiful wooden trusses in it, and so these were made available to us literally for dismantling and taking away. And for columns, we used railway irons. Yeah, I learned the art of welding. One had to use low hydrogen rods because rails have got a lot of carbon in them. They don't weld. They don't structurally weld very well. In fact, they don't. But so we ordered cleats on these rails to form the girts, to put the purlins on to hold the wall cladding. It must have been successful because the shed's still there today and all the cladding's still on it, so it can't be all bad. We had a lot of help in those days. Quite a lot of people were very keen about the idea of re-establishing Paikokariki, and I can't recall who did it, but we did have design people in our team. But with the help of all the volunteers and a lot of enthusiasm, within roughly from 1970 to 1975, we laid all that track up there. We built a shed. We were working on engines and acquiring carriages, so a lot of work went on at a fairly intense rate. I've always liked Ks and KAs. Put 942, I think, in about 1970. Is when we were forming Steam Incorporated, and the late Derek Brown helped me there. So Derek and I went down, and I was very keen to get a K rather than a KA. And Derek knew a lot more about it than I did. He persuaded me that KA 942 was the engine to get. So I wrote into the railways and asked if we could buy it, and got a favourable reply. I think I mentioned short arms and long pockets. The reality was that the members by that time had chipped in to buy 1234, and I don't think there's any more money left in the pot, so I ended up buying 942 outright. We've worked on it, Derek and I and other members of the Steam Incorporated worked on it down at hut shops, getting it ready to tow, and once we established Paikok, we moved it out to Paikokariki. I had an exceptional year sales-wise in my company. I got a bonus which was equivalent to 50% of my salary, so it was a major bonus, and enabled me to buy 1211. Now 1211 was a bit of an orphan or a dog, if you like. It was based at the Christchurch depot. It was known as a dirty engine, so it wasn't very popular. Subsequently, it didn't have a lot of miles on it, and it was in pretty good order. And Reed, my partner Reed, he was the one that wanted to buy it, and again he knew more about steam engines than I did. So I spoke to Reed and said, look, I've got some spare money that I hadn't counted on. How about we buy 1211? And Reed at the time was at university doing his PhD, so the agreement was that I'd buy it, and then eventually he'd pay me back the 50% share. Unfortunately, we thought it was good news at the time, but we got another shareholder involved, and that turned out to be one of my major mistakes in my life, bringing that third party in. So unfortunately, that decision was to cause me a lot of grief in 1976, and Reed initially didn't want that other person in on the shareholding. He said no, he was quite passionate about it. He said it's your and my loco, and that's how it should stay. I felt we should be more inclusive, but the other person I understood only wanted a share the same as we'd done with 1234, but I was mistaken. The other person had in his mind that he was entitled to a third of the share, that we three should be equal. Now the problem I had there was I was doing the financing and all the work, because both Reed and this other chap were at university doing their PhDs. So the burden of financing it and the burden of moving it and all the management of it and the day-to-day lay with myself and the volunteers. The other person, we'll call him the other person, he finished his university and came up to Steam Incorporated. Unfortunately, there seemed to be a division between him and I guess it's the mutiny of the bounty. He persuaded other people to think his way, which is fair enough. As a result, I literally came on the outer. Obviously I did have some support, but not as much as, and to be fair, it was a society, so these things happen. So anyway, I was ousted, and the culmination was when I was overseas on a business trip. Protagonists cut some appendages off the engine, which I wasn't very happy about. Of course, the old story, I was pretty upset about it, so I went to Malloy and he said, "Oh no, we'll fix this, no trouble at all." And I was a bit green as far as legal things go, and thought, oh good, this will be over in a few weeks, we'll soon sort this out. But of course, if anyone's been involved in the law, they'll know that it went on for about 3 or 4 years. A lot of money was spent. Eventually, the judge ordered the engine be sold, put up for auction, and I was fortunate enough to win the auction and obtain the ownership of the engine.
I first met Ian in Dunedin, where I was living at the time, where he came down with his family on a camping holiday. I was a volunteer at the Ocean Beach Railway, and Ian came to have a nosy around there with his family. And subsequently we went down to see the Kingston Flyer between Kingston and Lumsden at that stage. Then obviously I saw Ian on and off over the time when I came to Wellington, or he came down that way.
I called in at the Ocean Beach Railway and I met up with Graham and another chap, Alan Campbell. Started to meet some of these people who were interested in steam. One of the motives for going was to have a look at the Kingston Flyer. I met up with the chap, Russell Glendinning, who was running the Flyer at the time. Lovely chap, very nice man, Russell, and consequently formed a friendship with Russell, which was lifelong, and sadly he died last year. Yeah, so that was again part of the rail adventure, if you like. Graham was with Customs, the Customs Department at the time. Subsequently, or fairly shortly after our meeting, actually moved to Wellington.
I moved to Wellington in October '78, and shortly afterwards became involved with Ian, as he had by this stage separated from Steam Incorporated, and we were working at the rail airshed adjacent to Steam Inc, cleaning up the VR wagon that he had as a storage wagon, and also the KA. The KA then moved up to Otaki, and we continued to work on that, cleaning it up as best we could before it went to Auckland for final restoration at GVR.
As far as the ABs went, Reid and I still had a hankering for these engines, or one of these engines. They were the most ubiquitous of the steam locomotives in New Zealand. I think there's about 150 of the class, and wherever you went in New Zealand, there was always an AB shunting somewhere, if it was Awatoto and Napier, or Whangarei, or Hamilton. The ABs always seemed to be doing the branch line work, and as a boy, it was ABs and KAs that I mainly saw, and I guess I've got a secret little love affair with ABs. I think they're a stunning little engine. Going back to 1970, to buy one steam engine was a pretty reckless move, let alone even think about buying two. But buying one engine actually built quite a lot of confidence, and the only remaining one really on railway property was 663, which was quite a famous engine. It pulled the, I think it was the Duke of Gloucester back in about 1918 when they did a Royal Tour, 1919, whenever that was. And it was languishing at the Greymouth Roundhouse in company with A423 and A428. In 1975, the railways decided to move the locomotive, so there was no tender, it was just the locomotive. It was moved to the back of the Dunedin depot, maintenance depot. Around 1985, I think it was, the railways decided they no longer wanted the engine. It was the mid-80s. And they put it up for tender, for sale. So I put a tender in for the engine, and fortunately my tender was successful. So having won the tender, I also managed to acquire the locomotive tender, the spare one, the spare AB tender. I think it was off 811, if I recall. Managed to get it towed up to Dunedin, and I had some good friends in Dunedin that helped couple up the tender to the locomotive, and we shipped it north to Wellington. A lot of people in the railways were very helpful, and we managed to get space at the wood mill at the hut shops, and we managed to get permission to go on the weekends and start restoration.
After that, I was associated with him at the old woodworking shop at Woburn Shops, working on the AB with Ian's son Nigel and some others, and included the pulling out of all of the tubes so it could be ready for retubing, and just general preparation of it, derusting it, and cleaning it up so that the restoration work could actually start. When I first saw it at the workshops, it was in a very dilapidated state. I had seen it in the Dunedin rail yards prior to Ian purchasing it, and it was being raided for parts for the Kingston Flyer, and it was in a sorry state when we were working on it, to be honest. And we did that until basically the building was being demolished and he moved it to Silverstream Railway. But at that point I started to go overseas associated with my work, and sort of was away for a number of years.
Part of the financial fuel which allows Ian's obsession to thrive is his flooring sheet company Tradec. Back in 1976, however, he was still working for Diamond Industries and gradually moved up the ranks.
Had a lot of success with diamonds. We started off as a very small company. I can remember in the third year we turned over $1 million, which we thought was fantastic. But eventually I rose to become sales manager and then marketing manager for the company. Then Ted Houth was the owner of the company and ran it. We made corrugated iron, and we also then we decided to get into metal flooring, mainly due to all the high-rise buildings going up in Wellington. I remember quite a poignant moment when Ted watched the B&Z building going up, which was probably one of the first of the steel structures in Wellington. It ended up having a lot of problems with the boiler makers, and but Ted was mortified. I think the floor area or the roof area was about 4,000 square feet, and of course Ted could see 30 floors at 4,000 going up, and he wanted to supply the metal flooring. So that led to us making a roll forming machine that could make this metal flooring. And with that we needed two other products. We needed a fireproofing product, which we got an agency for from America, but probably from my point of view the most important is we needed these things called Nelson shear studs, which are like overgrown nails that you weld through the metal flooring directly into the steel beam.
The stud welding process was originally invented by Nelson prior to the U.S. entering World War II as a solution to the time-consuming problem of securing wooden decking to the flight decks of aircraft carriers.
Unknown to me at the time, that was going to be my future life and my future career. Ted eventually sold out to Winstones. I stayed with the company for 2 years and eventually became redundant. Now, part of my redundancy package was the agency for Nelson, because the troubles with the Boilermakers on the bank job, which I think was originally budgeted at 22 million and eventually blew out to not far short of 100 million. Winstone just didn't want the agency for the Nelson shear studs. So they gave all the welders and the generators and all the equipment. That was part of my redundancy package, and so I took it on. I left Diamonds in 1976. The first 2 years I struggled. I took part-time work to keep us going. Gloria, at the time, my wife, was a real estate agent, and I think she was earning about 5 times the amount or 6 times the amount of money I was. So I struggled on. After 2 years, I was almost at the point of calling it a day. I had been, ironically, I'd been offered by a couple of office supply companies top selling jobs with them, where I would have doubled the salary I'd been earning with Diamonds, and in those days that was good money. And anyway, after 2 years I was almost going to give it away and get a regular selling job, and I got a ring from a guy in or an American chap up in Taranaki. This was the time of, I think, big projects, and this was the Methanex plant, or methanol plant. It was about the first one off the block with these. Later, as you may recall, there was the gas-to-gasoline plant up at Motunui, and then the New Zealand steel mill and the refinery up at Whangarei, which I was involved in all of these. Going back to this particular day, I got a ring from this American chap and he said, "Say, are you the Nelson Stud welding man?" And I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Oh, we've got a little job up here in the Taranaki." He said, "It's fairly small." He said, "I'm not sure whether you're interested," but he said, "We rate your company in America very highly, and if you're half as good as what they are in America, I'd be delighted to do business with you." And I said, "Oh, I'm sure we can help you." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, we've got some refractory anchors to weld on these reformers." Well, firstly, I didn't know what a reformer was. Certainly, I had no idea what a refractory anchor was. So I said, "Well, how many involved?" He said, "Oh, it's only a small order." He said, "The first batch will be 500,000. Well, I almost fell over because at that time we were selling studs or shear connectors by the 100, maybe 1,000 or 2,000, but certainly nothing like 500,000. So that night I rang America and spoke to the chap I had a lot of dealings with over there, and he told me what a refractory anchor was, that he could sell them to me, told me what markup to put on them, told me what I should be charging to weld them, what I needed to, in other words, an awful lot of information. So the next day I was able to go back to this American chap and say, "Yep, we can do that, no problem." So, so then the journey began. One of the traps, of course, is a thing called provisional tax. So I hadn't been really making any money at that stage. So anyway, in the first year, not only did I, after the first year of doing this contract and subsequently further contracts, not only did I have to find tax for that year, but I had to find the provisional, which was double the tax that I had to pay. It amounted to a brand new Porsche. Now, I didn't have anything like that in cash. So suddenly, on paper I was earning an awful lot of money, but I certainly didn't have the money to pay my tax. And anyway, very fortunately the bank helped me out, and the cash flows improved and I was able to plough through it. So that's really how it all started. When I had that parting of the ways with Steam Incorporated, my father was keen on live steam and so was I. So we had the, when I say live steam, these were the miniature models that you can ride on or ride in on 7 1/4 inch gauge track. Nigel, I think at that stage, he was a teenager, and so we used to go around the model tracks and he came with me and he was quite keen on these steam engines. He also obviously was involved with me with the big ones. By that time we had them stored at Otaki. He took on a plumbing apprenticeship, and when he finished his apprenticeship, I think probably by this time he was about 20, I was establishing myself in business because, bear in mind, 1976, I started my own business, and that was the time when parted ways with Steam Incorporated. So really my emphasis was on getting the business established and becoming successful both well, financially and in other ways. I really had put my large engines to one side. And Nigel went over to England and he spent quite a bit of time with some of the preservation people in England. He saw what they were doing because they were leading the world at that stage, restoring locomotives and running them. And he came back very, very excited, and he said, "Come on, Dad, we've got to get these steam engines going." And I said, "Oh, not really. Can't do that at this stage, Nigel." He said, "Oh, no, we've got to do something, definitely." So at that time, I had 1211, and I had Ted Poynton working on it, and Grant Yorth entered into the scene at that stage, young Grant. And anyway, we leased part of the old goods shed down at in the West Yard, I think, at Auckland. And we started working on 1211 and restoring it. And from there we moved it up to the Bay of Islands to run at the Bay of Islands. And we did that for a season up there. And then it came back and went to Glenbrook. I think we ran it at Glenbrook. We decided to streamline, put 1211 back to its original streamlining, how it came out from North British in 1939. So Nigel said, "Look, Dad, I'll give up my job if you just support me with a vehicle and food and board and that type of thing." And he said, "Once you get sorted, you can sort me out later." So I said, "Oh, that sounds good. Okay, righto, we'll do it." So I think for 2 or 3 years, Nigel worked hard on 1211 again with Ted Poynton, and we restored the engine for mainline standards and streamlined it. Anyway, the sad thing was the engine was virtually complete when Nigel was coming home, and on a Friday night with his girlfriend from Auckland, come back home for a week, and sadly he had a very serious accident at Otaki and he was killed. So that was very, very tragic. And then we got invited to, through circumstances, to take it down to Ferrymead 125. It wasn't until I got up to Arthur's, going on that trip to Arthur's Pass, and I was north of Springfield, heading into country that Nigel and I both loved. Nigel shared that passion with me, and yeah, I was pretty close to tears. You know, I just probably felt his presence beside me on the footplate, even though, of course, by this time he'd been buried and was no longer with us. But yeah, it was very raw and a very emotional time to think something we'd both worked on. And sadly, I was enjoying it on my own without him. Well, I have to say both my father and my son were very supportive and passionate about saving these engines and seeing them back on the main line. So I guess it's, yeah, that's always at the back of my mind. I guess it's a course that's been set, and you know, I guess once you start these things, you stick with them. Yeah.
This locomotive is getting ready to go on a trip in 2 days' time. However, it was not until 1988 that Ian got his first big break.
By that time I actually had bought several engines, and one of them was suitable for the main line. And I got a call from one of the chaps at Ferrymead asking if I'd bring the engine down to Ferrymead and run it on the main line.
In October 1988, special trains ran to celebrate 125 years of railways in New Zealand. And steam was to the fore. For the 125 festivities, locomotives came from as far as Auckland, joining on the Sunday morning at the old steam depot at Linwood. J1211 is very much a product of her time. Evolving from the Art Deco period, along with Hudson's on the 20th Century Limited and Gresley A4s on the Flying Scotsman, this was true industrial art. Here, the American influence prevailed via the New Haven Railroad and the design of Otto Kuhler, which inspired these bullet-nosed beauties of 1939.
Steam on Parade was made quite late in our career at the film unit. It was made not long before the film unit got shut down and sold off for the song. In 1988, when the railways were celebrating 125 years of existence, they ran excursions again back down the middle of the line with the JA1250 and J1211, which had been streamlined by that time. Ian had only recently had it streamlined. I went to the South Island. I remember talking to Ian down in the railway yards, waiting for it to go on the rail ferry, about how this was the first time for him. It was a very exciting time for him because at last, over a number of years, he was going to get one of his locomotives, given all the work that he put into things, out on the main line running a big passenger train. So it was, of course, that 1211 and 1250 ran an excursion to Arthur's Pass and back at Labour Weekend, I think it was, in 1988, in conjunction with the 125 celebration. When 1211 headed the train back from Arthur's Pass that afternoon in front of 1250, with I think 15 cars or whatever it was the first time the Streamline J had run in the South Island since the late 1940s. These locomotives that Ian has are probably amongst the best steam locomotive designs in the world. So when we alerted to the producer to the fact that these steam trains were going to run Ian's locomotive with JA1250, we're going to run an excursion to Arthur's Pass, the producers with the marketing division said, oh, let's make a movie about it, we might be able to make some money. That's how and why it was made. It's ironical that we made a steam train movie because it was commercial.
So as a result of that, and meeting Alan Campbell, Alan Hamilton, Grant Yorth, Ian Mackay, names sort of reel off, we decided that we should form Mainline Steam, and it's now a trust, it's a heritage trust. Reid and I started Steam Incorporated. It seemed to be the right vehicle for restoring steam engines. There's virgin ground for us. We'd never been there before, obviously. Having sort of looked at both sides of the coin, I think it's absolutely the wrong vehicle. I believe trust's a much better way to go. It takes leadership to make these sort of things happen, and just not one leader, a series of leaders. And the beauty of trusts is that you have 3 or 4 or 5 people of like minds, and they become the leaders of the trust, and they will push it forward. Whereas in a society, it's a popular vote, and that may be fine, but it sounds good in theory, but in practice, what I've seen in society is all they do is spend their time fighting and squabbling. The sort of person I am, a society like Steam Incorporated would have been very limiting for me. So in hindsight, it actually worked out for the best, and it's allowed me to develop Mainline Steam with the help of other people, including yourself. I must acknowledge that. I mean, no one person can do this sort of thing. Yeah, very comfortable with Mainline Steam, and Mainline Steam is very successful. And so sometimes these things at the time you think they're a bit of a disaster, they turn out for the best.
Ian's success with his steam locomotives subsequently was not so much as a member of a society. He would belong to societies and he worked quite well with people, but when it ultimately came to the point of getting things done, and it was a question of getting stuck and doing things, and hard yakka and money, all the sort of things, and society kind of people didn't sort of click with Ian. Ian has made a success of what he's done with his locomotives because he's been able to successfully join the professional with the amateur world. He's been able to contain and marry together with a successful industrial business. There's been many societies in New Zealand who've achieved great things with locomotives, but they've done it in a different way. And it's not Ian's way. And that's fine, they're both different ways of doing things, but Ian has found a way of doing things which is unique.
We all share the same dream. You know, that's, bear in mind, this is big machinery, big cost, big effort, and yeah, it can be very hard on you. And I guess sometimes I can be a little outspoken. We share the dream and we try and climb the mountain together. That's what we try and do. If I was in England and say own one locomotive, like Flying Scotsman, I'd be famous. Unfortunately, if you're successful, there's always people who will knock you. I think that's the tall poppy syndrome. So, but I think in New Zealand you just got to accept that if you are successful, most people applaud your efforts and your work, but there's always those in society that got to put you down. Yeah, it's driven by passion, you know, and we all have things in life that we want to achieve and that we're passionate about. And obviously we've got to do a lot of drudgery things to get there. We've probably got to try and build wealth, we've got families, home. And like anything in life, it's like eating a nice meal, but afterwards you've got to do the dishes. So I think it's just where your passion lies, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to indulge in that passion, if you like. It depends where you want to confine your energies. What does annoy me, I know some very intelligent people. One guy in particular lives in an ivory tower, and I think to myself, what a waste. Highly intelligent man, an engineer, lives in an ivory tower.
This was well before Ian started to build his own depot right here. Prior to 1993, Ian had to rely heavily on the generosity of others to store his 2 Wellington locos.
At the end, we actually moved the engine out of the hut shops after about a 5-year period, and we went to Silverstream and virtually finished it. Well, we did finish the restoration of Silverstream. I'm very grateful to the Silverstream Railway for the help that they gave in getting it going. The only good thing on the engine was the inner firebox. That's all I could say. Everything else was terrible. We took the opportunity at the time to convert it to roller bearings. We put roller bearings right through apart from the main drivers, and we also converted the engine from coal-fired to oil-fired.
In early 1993, newly joined trust members Graham Moffat and Richard Head purchased this DJ diesel right here from New Zealand Railways. And of course, like Ian, they needed to find somewhere to put it. They arranged a lease on a disused and decrepit goods shed in Upper Hutt, which they ended up transferring to Ian, who had the means to renovate it. This was Ian's first depot in Wellington, which housed his steam loco AB663 4 years later.
We had to take it up by truck. There was no rail access to Silverstream. It had its challenges, but rebuilding the AB was a huge challenge. I don't think I'd like to take it on again. We did about 3 or 4 trips almost in succession once we got it going. That was the day they went to welcome the new millennium, the millennium trip. Yeah, Beach Loop. We at 5 a.m. in the morning we put on a breakfast. Yeah, that was quite a memorial, wasn't it? And we took the AB up there and had the AB. Yeah, we've done some great things with that AB.
When I was living in Huntly as a boy, I used to sit at college and the railway line from the mines used to run next door, and I would always stare out the window watching the BBs struggle up onto the Huntly Bridge with a load of coal. And I can remember to this day my teacher saying, "Don't look out the window, it'll get you nowhere." But I guess the last laugh was on me in my future years as an engineman with New Zealand Rail. I started in Frankton as a cleaner on the 18th of September 1961. For my boiler ticket I went into a class. A boiler was broken down into its components and how those components worked in relation to the steam engine. After I had passed my steam ticket, I was put on to boiler duties in Frankton, where we would look after anything between 9 and 10 boilers a night. Our job was to care for boilers that were in steam, light up, and care for boilers that were in steam, waiting to go into service on whatever duties they were to perform. The reason we had to sit and get a steam ticket, we had to know the boiler, we had to know what to look for. There are a number of safety aspects which we look for before lighting an engine up. We have a safety valve built into all steam locomotives to protect the boiler from overpressure and the possibility of boiler explosion. So after I'd been a cleaner for 9 months, I sat my fireman's ticket, or that for a loco trainee assistant as we were known. As a fireman, when I first started as a fireman, I got sent out on shunt duties and prepare and put away duties in the loco shed. Prepare and put away means when a loco would come in, we would coal it and service it and put the locomotive in its place until its next duties. It was quite a challenging job, and a job I really loved, especially with a steam engine, because until you have been on the lead engine with 2 massive steam engines pounding their way and talking to you in the middle of the night is something to hear and actually see and feel. They were really, I suppose you could say, like poetry in motion, and it was something to behold. And to this day, I love the sound of a locomotive, especially a KA, working like mad to attack and conquer a hill. After I left the railways in 1975, I joined the fire service in Wellington and moved to Upper Hutt. I there became involved with Mainline steam and met for the first time Ian Welch, who absolutely fascinated me with his dedication to steam locomotives and railway working. I found Ian to be a great person. I'd heard many things about Ian which were very, very unfounded. I found working for Ian in the Upper Hutt old goods shed with AB663 quite fascinating, because I was allowed to do more as a volunteer for his organisation than I could do in my time on the railways.
As I said, by the time I came back, Ian had established this Plympton depot. I then became involved as a volunteer, and I had the intention of semi-retiring. My wife had other ideas. And at that point Ian offered me a job helping with his business, Nelson Stud Welding, Tradeck New Zealand, laying composite floors and stud welding around the place. Stud welding is a method of construction, particularly in commercial buildings, where we use shear studs, and these studs are like bolts, if you like, and they are welded to the beams which form part of the flooring, and Tradeck is laid as the formwork, if you like, and it allows the whole building to be structurally tied into the frame, the steel framework, the stud welding. The Tradeck the product that we lay is like long roof iron, and it is laid as the formwork on which concrete is then poured, and they're welded through the tin, through the Tradeck, onto the steel beam, so that it forms a rigid tie into the whole structure. I've worked at that for a number of years now, and basically become the Wellington manager for Nelson Stud here at the moment.
Unfortunately, the assistance that Ian needed from New Zealand Railways has not always been forthcoming. However, there have been some within the Railways organisation who have empathised with Ian's cause.
I started off in the civil side of railways in Dunedin. I got a job there. I qualified NZCE and went across and got a job within the district engineer's office in Dunedin in 1970 something or other too. I was a civil engineer, and so I started off working on the track, stringing curves, small bits of design, supervising buildings, managing building repairs, maintenance, all that sort of thing. I got a transfer to Wellington here. Mechanical branch particularly had a jaundiced view of the private societies. I think the mechanicals saw themselves as the professional group who ran the mechanical side of railways, and the Federation members didn't have that professionalism, and therefore they were seen to be second class, I guess. I enjoy Ian's enthusiasm for getting things done, and for his tenaciousness, if you like, of pushing ahead. He can be frustrating as well. He can be... he will try and get things done which the regulations don't permit him to do, and sometimes he needs to be pulled into line for that. But other times you look at it and think, well, why have we got this silly regulation there? Perhaps what he's wanting to do is totally reasonable, and so if we can, let's change the rules a little bit and see if he can do things. He was seen as a thorn. I mean, it was the then mechanical engineers. Bear in mind, I came out of civil, so I wasn't tarred with all the mechanical side, but mechanical engineering really didn't like the private rolling stock. And Ian's passenger cars have been a testy matter. Ian was on record for a long time of saying he didn't want passenger cars at all. He wanted to concentrate on the steam engine, and he expected to be able to acquire or hire carriages from rail. That became a problem. He couldn't get the cars when he wanted them. They started to charge him lots of money for them. I was of the view that he probably would be better to acquire Kiwi Rail cars that were then running as Kiwi Rail replaced them with British Rail cars. And so they became not a cast off, but an easier way to acquire cars than to spend all the money converting the British Rail cars. And so I guess partially he's got a mixture of both now. He's got some cars that he's converted from the 4 foot 8.5 to the 3 foot 6 gauge and put New Zealand bogies on them. And he's bought some cars that were running on the Mainline up until a short period of time ago. But he does need his own cars because Kiwi Rail is now not in the business of having a charter fleet and doesn't have cars available. So if you want to go and run trains, you've got to have both the thing at the front and the bits and pieces at the back.
Before Ian built this facility, his first depot was in fact in Christchurch, following the running of the 125th celebrations.
In the early 2000s, yeah, I sort of was a bit of a loose end, so came up here to basically learn about oil burners because I'd never had anything to do with them up to that point, and it just really morphed from there. doing that, I became the manager in 2008, and we're still here now. Basically, I'm classed as the depot manager / engineering manager, so I'm responsible for the running of the depot and ensuring that all the engineering protocols that we have in place for mainline steam are followed. Actually a volunteer position, although I am employed by Ian to run the Nelson Stud Welding South Island branch, I do both. This is the old Southern goods shed, and I don't actually know when it was built, so it was dismantled and brought up here in several truckloads. And the interesting thing is, and I find it's a bit of a small world and it might be quite irrelevant, but my grandfather worked in this shed many years ago. My father was an engine driver on the railways. He started in the early 50s, and he was one of the drivers on the last train that went to Fairlie, and George Turner drove the lead locomotive and Dad drove the second one. A number of years later, the Pleasant Point guys had got their AB going, so they invited Dad and George out there to drive the thing basically on a running day, and they both ended up joining up with the outfit and carrying on. So at the great old age of 6 years old, George Turner was the first person to actually let me have a drive of an AB. I stood on his knees when he sat in the seat, and in the very early 90s I came up and I did a trip with KA. We went to the pass and back. A mate of mine by the name of Alan Hamilton, he looked after the locos here pretty much from day one. And then a few years ago, when Ian wanted to set up a branch of Nelson Stud Welding in the South Island, I sort of expressed a bit of an interest there, and one thing led to another, and here we are. We've got 3 staff here in Christchurch at the moment. We cover the whole South Island, basically. We did a reasonably large job in Greymouth last year. We supply studs, we hire welders, we do anywhere in the South Island, we'll send them out and do that. Obviously the local work is a bit better for us, but we've done jobs in Queenstown and Invercargill, we've been to Blenheim. We plug away at that, and then when there's not an awful lot of stud welding stuff to do, we're here working on the railway equipment. At the moment we've got 2 steam locomotives here, JA's 1240 and KA 942. We have KB 968 tucked away down in the back, so we're building our carriage fleet. We're on our last carriage at this stage, getting away. It's taken us quite a while to get through them all because they've been pretty poor condition, you could say, to be fair. And then also we've been out on site doing stud welding jobs, so that's made the whole job stretch out. All our cars were built in Otahu in Auckland. They were built between 1939 and 1945. The seating layouts on the carriages was altered. They were fitted with tables between the seats. Once we get these cars up and running, we can actually get our engines back out and start operating on the network again, running trains. We've been off the road probably, this will be the 4th winter, and that when KiwiRail withdrew their charter fleet, that left us with no carriages. Our traditional trips out of Christchurch here are between here and Arthur's Pass, and we used to run 5 of those every winter. The mountains, the snow, you could say the scenery is impressive. It's a really nice trip going up around through the gorge, the Waimak Gorge, and just getting out to the back country where in a lot of places you cannot get into by vehicle access. The Arthur's Pass trip is where Ian Welch really developed quite a passion for steam, I believe. He did a trip up there many moons ago behind a KB class locomotive, and it's always been one of his favourite trips. It's what sparked his interest, was that day that he went to Arthur's Pass behind a KB. Really, it must have made some sort of impression on him that he's never ever forgotten. And then to actually be able to get the lease on the locomotive, well, one of the locomotives that he travelled behind, and to be able to bring that back to operational condition and take it up there again, I imagine that's a pretty big driving force behind what he's trying to achieve. So that was the catalyst for going to Arthur's Pass. The public seem to love it, especially when there's a bit of snow on the ground, and it always changes, nothing's ever the same up there. And it's also, for our locomotives and the product that we're trying to sell to the people, you can hear the locomotives working, and the sound of that coming off the hills seems to stir an awful lot of people up.
Even after Ian Welch had acquired every possible New Zealand locomotive that was still available, he still wasn't satisfied. So Ian looked to South Africa to broaden his horizons.
The reason I've got so many engines is that basically I've just paid scrap value for them, which hasn't been very much money at all. And that particularly applied to South Africa, as you think, why invest in South Africa? Firstly, they've got very nice steam engines. In New Zealand, basically, I missed out. I ended up getting engines that were not very good. They were wrecked. By the time people like myself came to acquire them, that's what was left. So I was determined almost not to see the same thing happen in South Africa. And again, I was able to buy them for scrap value. And so I bought 4 South African engines and moved them to New Zealand. 2 are very, very large locomotives, and 1 Garrett, which is a double-ended engine. But I bought a smaller engine, which was a similar size to our J's. I got approached by a chap. There's a very scenic run from Cairns up to the mountain village of Kuranda. It's about a 2-hour trip by rail. A charming route, a bit like Arthur's Pass. A chap had a bus tour operation, saw the potential for steam, and he approached me with a view of starting in Kuranda. And I went across there and had a look at it. With Grant Yorth and myself, we decided that we'd do up this South African 24 class. So we did all the work at Parnell, and we shifted it over to Brisbane and then trucked it up to Cairns. At the same time, we bought, I think, something like 10 carriages from Queensland Rail. Spent something in the order of about $3 million Australian dollars getting established. And each time we went to get started, the bar lifted just a little bit. Oh no, before you can get started, we need you to do this. So then we'd comply, we'd have to do whatever we had to do, and of course that took another 6 months or whatever. In the end, it was 5 years before we got operational. And something I learned actually, that you don't sell these trains overnight. You've actually got to get established. You've got to run your trains whether they're full or empty. And it takes quite a while to get into the market, particularly that as a tourist market. There's about a 12 to 18 month lead time. We could only stand the pain for so long. In the end, we were down the tubes to about the tune of about $1 million. And after 10 months, I had to make the decision either I was going to have to borrow a lot more money to keep it running or to cease running. So reluctantly, we pulled the plug. A few months before that, we had been approached by the Queensland government this time, the transport side, who were actually had funded this rail car called the Savannalander. It runs every week during the season. It's a 9-month season, and it goes from Cairns out to a place called Forsyth, which is out in the desert. So it takes 2 days to get there and 2 days back again. Queensland Rail, that's the rail section, the operating section, they'd been running the Savannalander up until then, and there seemed to be some friction between Queensland Transport or the government and Queensland Rail. So they decided that they'd look for other operators, and there was a consultant came in from Victoria, and he suggested they talk to us because we were the only other operator in Queensland at that time. We had many meetings with Queensland Transport, and it was headed by a lady who was a lawyer, Lucy Snelling. I like Lucy, but Lucy was a hard negotiator. And I do recall one conversation which has lasted in my memory and rather amused me. Lucy was, I won't say laying down the law, but she was explaining in fairly strong terms what was expected of us if we managed to get the contract. So I sort of stopped her and said, well, hang on, Lucy, this is a 2-way street. It's just not one way. I and my partners, we're laying our life on the line here as well. We're making a commitment to our life. Not only financially, we're making a commitment in time and effort. But I said, just coming from New Zealand, we're going from Cairns, which is a popular spot, but we're going virtually out to nowhere in the outback. I said, in New Zealand, that sort of service disappeared 20 years ago. I said, it just seems unusual to me that you should want to keep this rail car going. He said, oh, well, there's a very good reason. She said, it just happens to be the Minister of Transport's electorate. I said, oh, well, Lucy, that puts an entirely different light on the matter, doesn't it? I said, where do we sign? So that was a bit of humour. But we're still running the Savannalander, and It's been a delight. We've enjoyed it, and we seem to be very successful with it, and patronage goes up every year.
Ian's railway interests are not just limited to mainline steam engines, but a whole collection of scale models and also live steam locomotives as well.
I was in kindergarten in 1999, and conveniently for me, I happened to be at Plymouth in kindergarten. And in 1999, Ian bought this property, or early 1998 he bought this property, and I remember seeing this shed getting built. The first locomotive which turned up here just happened to be J1211, and because I lived in Camborne, we've got a view of the railway coming down from Porrirua all the way down to Goat Point. So I saw J1211 turn up and didn't think anything of it. So the next day, 1211 was parked outside the main shed. So I got Mum to take me in to have a look at 1211. So it all started from there. When I was 7, I started coming down here, and the first job I got given was to clean out the firebox on 1211. After that, it sort of dawned upon me that this was, I wouldn't say my calling, but I wanted to get more skilled on steam, more skilled with how the operation of the locomotives worked. The smoke comes out of them, the wheels turn, the rods turn, everything. It's in your face. A diesel's a box on wheels, and really it still doesn't interest me, but I'm still stuck in 1965, as apart from people who are into their cell phone technology and computers and all that stuff. I like getting my hands dirty because that's what my father did. Ian invited me to come around to his house in Seaview Road in 2011, I believe it was, and to help him finish off his 7 1/4 inch 2442 Mallet number 26. And at that stage most of the work was done, but it was just the final putting of the cladding back on the boiler, giving it a hydro test, and just putting all that together again. And I think it was the Sunday after we went down to Petone and met up with Gavin McCabe, who subsequently gave us a boiler certificate for the locomotive, and we had a good day down at Petone figuring out the controls on the engine again after many years of Ian not using it because obviously he's got mainline steam and his company to look after. Ian told me when he got the bullet from Steve Inc. he wanted to get back into steam because he was somewhat depressed that he didn't have the big ones to play with for the time being. So he got in touch with a local builder, Harold Sinclair, who he then bought a 5-inch 2662 Mallet off, which is now sitting at his home and is the next one to get rebuilt after many years of not being used and many years of being used. So that's how I've been told Ian got into it. After that it spiralled out of control with his latest purchase from the USA of ex-Tom Miller's K36. So Ian's involved with the Petone Hutt Valley live steamers in Petone, and he's the patron for that club, has been for many, many years, and he got involved with that club through Harold Sinclair, and Ian's been there since probably the very early 1990s, late 1980s, with obviously number 77 in his first 5-inch gauge Mallet, which Harold built back in 1982, I think. So Ian, he's built a small house up on the top of a hill looking out towards the Patanui Inlet, which happens to have a lot of land with it, and he's got big plans to build his own miniature railway around his house and on the adjacent land which the house comes with. So currently there is a garage getting built as an engine shed houses about 11 steam engines. Once the engine shed is in, the railway will be built around the house and over a gully, down the back of his property and back up again. So it'll be around 1.5 kilometres long by the time it's finished.
I'm not a qualified engineer. I worked for Customs for 30-something years before joining Ian and Nelson Stud Welding. I oversee the depot workshop here, and my role really is to support the tradesmen that are working here. We have a full-time engineer fitter on site, full-time electrician on site, and a number of experienced labourers, welders, etc., that are working on the projects in the workshop here.
My brother Colin is manager of welding supplies, and he came to me one day and said, "Oh, there's a bunch down the road are looking for an electrician. Maybe you should go and have a chat." I wasn't doing a hell of a lot at the time, so I thought, why not? So I rang Ian, and I was expecting him to be here all day, every day, being the boss and all. And he said he'd meet me. I came down and sat down with Ian, and he, obviously liked what he saw, because that was 8 years ago, and I'm still here. I did my electrical here in Plymouth as a kid growing up, so industrial, commercial, domestic, sewage pumps. Sent to the railways by a temping agency because I'm an electrician and they wanted somebody to fix traction motors. Being stuck in a tin shed, it was quite heartbreaking, repetitive work, same stuff all the time, and I wanted to fix trains. I just didn't want to fix traction motors. Traction motors were all right, I learnt quite a lot about them, but I wanted to get up on the big machines and make them go. And a friend of mine that I'd met through the train control network, was a network control manager at the time, he put me in contact with a John Sargent in Wellington Yards, and he managed to pull the strings, and I got transferred to the locomotive depot at Thorndon, and spent time learning the ropes there, and then eventually went for my locomotive maintenance certificate through the locomotive depot there, and spent just over 10 years in loco, fixing locos, doing checks on locos. But my main role was, diesel engine repairs. I was in the stage I wanted to learn everything I could about the railway and how the railway worked, and the individual parts that went to make it work. The railways, in their own way of doing things, were pretty uptight. But coming here, the style of work dictates that you take a measured approach to it without too much pressure from above. This is a lot more relaxed, absolutely. And Ian's good like that. He'll give me enough breathing space to fix some of the trickier things that I have to fix. If it takes a little bit longer, he tends to lean on me a little bit, which is what you expect from an employer. But the variety of stuff that I have to work on, it's not just train related, rail vehicles. It's also the core business of what keep Nelson Stud Welding. They keep me fairly busy as well.
Current workload in the workshop has changed from what Ian and a number of us envisaged originally, and that was basically we would restore locomotives to run out on the main line, and we would not get involved in carriages, because we saw carriages as a major time-consuming overhead. That unfortunately fell over when KiwiRail and its predecessors decided not to charter us carriages and get out of the charter business, and we had to get our own carriages. Having said that, we now own, as a group, a number of carriages ranging from 100-year-old wooden cars through to the 30s, 40s and modernised AO carriages. The AO carriages, when purchased, had come out of service and we believed to be in reasonable condition, but then upon investigation found that we had substantial work to be done on these cars, and what really we had hoped to achieve in 6 months. They've been a major exercise for us over the last few years, and are continuing to be so, because we're having to build a fleet for Wellington, and of course we have what was originally imported was the Mark II British carriages, which has been a major conversion to New Zealand requirements. Obviously all of the The bogies are much different between the UK and New Zealand, so the cars have been lowered. We've had to modify the underframes. We've had to take out all of the electrical side of things and replace that. The air conditioning units had to be replaced, so there's been a lot of time and effort gone onto those BR cars, and they will be used as the fleet for our Auckland depot when it gets up and running at Mercer. This workshop on the whole, and its associated machine shop, undertakes practically all of the work that any of the major railway organisations around the world would undertake. We have big lathes, big drill presses, all the machinery here. We have a drop pit outside so that we can drop wheels out of locomotives. The only thing that we can't do at the moment is turn our wheels to do that, but that's contracted out. But we do have a wheel lathe here, which we will be installing either in Plympton or in our new Mercer depot. That's yet to be decided, but we are getting to a stage where we are getting close to being self-sufficient in the machinery required to do all of the restoration work in-house.
Mainline Steam's restoration and operations would not be possible without the invaluable contributions made by volunteers.
As a child, I'd always been sort of, and it's natural for any child to be sort of fascinated by trains, and so I just modelled NZR 316 as a teenager and sort of moved away from it for quite a while, and so it would have been around about 2003, 2004. I was having various time-based issues where I was spending basically week after week at work and just ran out of time for myself, and so I thought of back to my childhood, what I used to enjoy, and so it was just one day I was driving past and I happened to see a Mainline Steam sign go up on the side of the building over there, and I thought, sure, let's go over and have a look. And so I come out and have a look and just see what they're doing, and sort of seeing Richard with his DJs that I think he'd moved out not too long prior to that. Though I can't remember what else they were working on, probably 12, 11 they were working on at the time, and so Richard needed a bit of help. And so I just sort of started floating around, and pretty much from then I'd come out sort of maybe once a month or so, just spend a day out here with my own kind, with blokes and that, because most of my clients are all women. Ian had this opportunity, would have been, I think it was around August 2004, when Toll were breaking up the old NZR heritage fleet, and the EW was being sent out to scrap at Sims. And Ian, as a child, was fascinated with EWs because he got taken to school behind them. And so when he heard this, he, of course being Ian, had an opportunity to talk to Sims directly, and he was able to write a cheque for whatever it was, 20, 40, 100,000, whatever it might have been, to basically buy it straight off Sims. But again, that was just people talking to people. Otherwise, the locomotive would have gone to scrap. Ian likes looking at pretty things, and as far as Ian's concerned, it's a pretty looking locomotive. He didn't know what he was going to do with it. Ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to achieve is get the thing on the network. And when we first got the locomotive back in 2004, we had hordes of people who said that they were going to come out and help. They'd be out every Saturday to get it going. None of them have turned up. So for the last, how long is it now? 12, 14 years, I've been pretty much on the thing solidly. I've been quite lucky to have Robert Thompson helping me, and he's an ex-Transpower DC engineer, so he helped with the Cook Strait cable and with Hayward Hill. And so he's been instrumental in getting it as far as it has. We've had to replace the pantographs on it with modern style single arm type, and that was a pragmatic decision, mainly to get us as modern as we could. So if anything were to go wrong, we can say, well, we're using your current specification of equipment. We've got to fit ditch lights and translog and all that sort of thing. But everything else, we can use as it is. Well, ideally, I mean, it was for us to get around the whole tunnel gas restrictions through tunnels 1 and 2, because Kiwi Rail just made it making it so hard for us to run steam engines into Wellington. So we were going to run trains from Wellington either as far as Paihook or Waikanae. change over to steam, and then do the reverse coming back into town again, so for your tour train. So certainly that happened in the past. So before they lowered the tunnels in the late 60s, the railways would run steam, pretty much from Auckland down to Paikok, and then they would change over to electric, whether it be ED or EW, to then haul the train all the way into town. I mean, that was just done to get around smoke nuisance in the carriages, and so I guess we're just trying to recreate that experience for our passengers.
While there are many train enthusiasts, there aren't many who use their passion to inspire and delight the way Ian does. He unites a community of workers, volunteers and passengers, young and old.
No, my love or my passion has always been steam excursions on the main line, where you're not limited just to one section of track. And as a result of forming mainline steam, I think most of our engines have covered literally from, not going to say Kaitaia to Bluff. We've certainly been to Bluff, and we've been to Oteria, which is the furthest north one could go at that time. So there's not many lines that we haven't been on in New Zealand. That's what excites me, if you like. Being confined to a track from A to B, really, in my view, can get very boring. We've run about every 2 years, we run a 10 to 14 day steam tour of New Zealand. Now that has proved reasonably popular, but our maximum we've ever had has been about 80 people.
My name is Tania Cunningham and I live in Westport. We've been a couple of years ago and we wanted to take the kids again on it. It's great. The kids have enjoyed it. It's got lots to look at and it's quite neat. My name's Megan Carey and I'm from Westport. It's the first time I think I've been on a train in New Zealand, a scenic train ride. It's great. Yeah, I love the scenery and the fact that the kids are really excited. It makes it all the more enjoyable.
My name is Nolene and I live in Westport. My brother works for the railway and he sent us a text yesterday to tell us the train was coming into town. He works on the gang up the gorge doing the tracks and things like that. He's done it for quite a few years. My father did it prior to that. So we decided to take the grandchildren on the trip today. So it's been lovely to come down through here.
We're at the bottom of the world. Some of the tourist lines that do very well obviously are Switzerland and South Africa. You've got Rovis Rail who run safari out to lion parks and things like that. I think Rowan Voss of Rovis Rail is now running often 3 trains a day to this type of thing. Not all steam, mainly diesel these days, but Rowan, or South Africa, where he's based out of Johannesburg, he's only 8 hours flying time for most of the large European cities, including London. New Zealand, from the Northern Hemisphere down here, for most people it's a 24-hour flight. You get the cruise ships coming in. I believe that would have potential, has got potential.
Ian has been encouraging capable and energetic members to join the team as the operation grows.
My father obviously had a model train set like a lot of families have in that, and my grandfather used to drive the J locomotives in his younger days, so we were talking about those stories and that. My background is pretty much for a trades background in telecommunications and other utilities such as power and gas. So I spent my first working year on the road, sort of doing my trade, and had a van and out and about, and looking after customers' faults and that. So lucky enough to get into some supervision management roles, and have pretty well over the last 30 years of my career been in management roles, looking after business units throughout the country. I feel that's given me a good grounding, and certainly these skills I'm able to now apply into Mainline Steam to help us move forward with our business here. My work brought me to Wellington about 5 or 6 years ago, and aware of the Heritage Railway organisations in Wellington, so come had a look at Mainline Steam, talked to the guys, they made me feel most welcome, and pretty well ended up volunteering on the Saturdays and contributing to Mainline Steam. My timing was right around where Mainline Steam hadn't been running excursions. There was withdrawal of the charter fleet by Kiwi Rail, so Mainline Steam was still in the process of getting their carriages certified. As I came on board, we were going through the final stages of the AO carriage certification, so they were certified in early 2016 to run on the Kiwi Rail network. I sort of had understood enough of the business and the group, so I put my hand up to start to organise the heritage excursion trip. We're pretty well, trying to offer a sort of premium type sort of experience for our customers. So we've got a good team of carriage attendants that work with us. We focus a lot on our people our customers once they're on the train. With what AO carriages offer in the respect of air conditioning and the large windows and the nice comfortable setting, just make a very nice experience for our people, and try and sort of attract that clientele that they're happy to have a nice day out on the train. As our fleet comes on board and as we expand our operations with the rest of our carriages getting certified across the country, we'll better run the same sort of trips out of Christchurch, and once the Auckland depot's finally up and running, we'll do the same in Auckland. So part of I guess the strategy and having the 3 depots across the country is we obviously have a good asset base, but it gives us some efficiencies, and when we want to look at doing tours, and if we've done international tours before where we've targeted overseas groups, so going forward we'll look at the international market again, and either we'll do them ourselves or work with a reputable supplier such as a travel company, and be able to run tours either from one end of the country to the other and back, and there's some cost effectiveness in being able to do it because we'll have equipment sort of our main depots, 3 depots, Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington. So we're thinking about what's next for us. How do we utilise the equipment that we've been lucky now to be able to use and have, and certainly the pleasure we're able to bring to our customers by experiencing the steam train will help to cement Mainline Steam as one of the premier sort of heritage train travel organisations in the country. We're extremely grateful, I guess, to the foresight of Ian and the effort and the commitment he's put into building this impressive fleet of heritage locomotives and rolling stock, and the work that's been done. And then if you look at the history of Mainline Steam, the efforts, the battles, the challenges that everyone's gone through to get the organisation to where it is now, take my hat off to the people involved in that. And as we move forward, and we've got a good structure established, a good management team that pretty well gives us the confidence to run forward, and we're sort of in the position where Ian can now sit back and let us run the business, and my responsibility as the general manager is to make sure those efforts are continued on, and that we get really good return on it.
I've known Ian for a long time, and Ian is an interesting character to work for. He is a taskmaster. He does want things done when he wants them done, but likewise he's a very compassionate man, and is very helpful in a lot of the things that he will do to see that you thrive as well. His manner at times can be off-putting to a lot of people, because he is forthright, comes out and says exactly what he thinks, And a number of people over the years, I think, have been put off by his forthrightness. Well, I don't know whether you'd say he doesn't suffer fools lightly, but he's certainly expects people to carry out their duties as given. Part of the volunteer side of things can be a bit tough on some people that perhaps don't quite understand what it's all about and are learning but are keen. Ian perhaps at times has an expectation that everyone can do a number of tasks even without having instruction on how to undertake those tasks. So that's something we, as a manager, I'm conscious of and try to protect some of our newer people from. Ian's involvement now with the workshop is basically he allows those people that know what they're doing to get on and do things, and obviously with our engineer and our electrical people, they can get on and do things without any hassles. Some of the others, Ian does want to assist them in their duties, I'll put it that way, which can be a bit frustrating, but on the whole, you get used to Ian and his little whims and ways, and get on and do the job. He's always played an active role, but his role perhaps is diminishing a little bit now because he is getting a little bit older and therefore is not able to physically do some of the jobs that he used to do with enthusiasm. So that's a sign of age, unfortunately. Ian will be in the depot every Saturday. He'll also be down here during the week, probably 2 or 3 times a day. So he's active in the business and in the restoration side of things. Ian over the years has always worried about the future of mainline steam in general and has set up 2 trusts. One is the Ian Welch Locomotive Trust, and that trust has the ownership of all of the locomotives, rolling stock and everything else here. And the other arm is the Mainline Steam Heritage Trust, which is really the operational arm. And the trustees for the Mainline Steam Heritage Trust are basically enthusiasts, if you like, people that are working here. Those people involved in the Mainline Steam Locomotive Trust include family members of Ian's. So there will always be a Welsh involvement in the locomotives. The future of mainline steam is being taken care of. Obviously, time will tell because whether mainline steam can continue to have paid employees and all of this type of thing is something that we'll have to address as and when the unfortunate happens.
Mainline steam has become a large and efficient organisation, and its ongoing viability has been at the forefront of Ian's vision.
I was a member of the Locomotive Society going back to 1958, and they had a day out going around the various locations, about 2002, 2003, and so I did the tour, but I did it by car, not by bus. And so having gone to Steam Inc. and gone up to the tramways, I then came back here on my own, and so Ian was very courteous. He said, "Come in, would you like a cup of coffee?" And I said, "Oh, very nice." So he sat me down and he made a nice cup of coffee for me. And it's the last cup of coffee he's done, by the way, but never mind, I was quite bowled over by his very nice, friendly approach. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I've retired from Ernst Young, that full time. I've got now time in my hands. And I vowed never again would I put the alarm clock on a Sunday night to ruin that night to be early hours on Mondays. So Mondays is now my day off to do what I want to do." And he said, "Oh, would you like to come out here?" And so that started the whole system off. On a Monday I'd come out and do whatever was coming up. I was always interested in steam locomotives from a young person. My grandparents had a house in Waikawaiti, north of Dunedin. We'd go out there by train, go through the Mikawaka Tunnel, and you watch the smoke come through all the cracks, and you get out the other side and open the windows. And then you get out to Waikawaiti and we'd be stopped at the railway station and hop off then up to my grandparents' place, which is not too far away from the railway station. When I got with Ian and I got more and more engaged with working with Ian, and at that stage he knew my background and he had came to me and said, look, I'm wanting to more formalise the Heritage Trust. He had replied through one of his lawyers to do this some years previously, and nothing had happened. And so he said, I haven't got the time to deal with it, but could you deal with it? So I met his lawyer and then fleshed out what he wanted to have the trust to be formed. He wanted trustees who would look after the locomotives and to restore the locomotives and to put things on a formal basis so that Ian could be satisfied that his locomotives would be looked after in the long run. The idea was that all the locomotives would be serviced by the Heritage Trust, and so he'd go for charitable status and the whole lot registered that way. Then, of course, realised, of course, how was the locomotives to be looked after, because they're all in Ian's name, all the rolling stock's in Ian's name. So Ian realised that he wanted to form the Locomotive Trust so he could guarantee the safety and security of his locomotives when he died. And so that's when we agreed we go ahead and form the Ian Welch Locomotive Trust, because he's transferred all their rolling stock into that trust with the primary responsibility of maintaining the locomotives so they wouldn't be sold, disposed of or cut up. So that's the role of the Locomotive Trust. Now, then he decided, or we actually decided, the Mainline Steam Heritage Trust would still be responsible for the maintenance, the running of the trips. So they formed the two different trusts, so they could be responsible for each section of responsibility for the collection.
We've seen what Ian's achieved, so now I'd like to meet him myself. Let's go to his home and see what Ian has to say about his accomplishments and why he's done what he has. Oh, kia ora, Ian. It's lovely to finally meet you, and obviously to see around your incredible house. Yeah, it's absolutely magical. But obviously it all started with the collecting of trains, and I think for me what inspires me about trains is, I guess, the beautiful aesthetic, which is kind of that, I suppose I'd say like vintage, but sort of a window into the past. But what kind of things do you relate to the obsession or fascination with locomotives yourself?
I think it goes back to one's early days. Obviously, my age, I was very much part of the steam era, so I've got wonderful memories. They're very impressive. Steam locomotives are very impressive machines.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, even today, I went to America a couple of years ago, and I went on this little mountain railway, and I guess Thomas has done this, but not so much in America. But I mean, the kids, they just absolutely, it's like a magnet. You're steam engine going, and suddenly all these kids are rushing up.
Yeah.
Going in, and that reminded me that's what I was like as a child.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Graham, obviously one of the people who used to work with you or work for you, described it kind of like the fact that it's alive. It's always going, it's always got this fuel running, but I suppose for me it's also just the intensity of like the of a classic sound and imagery of all the cogs turning and stuff. Is that part of what you're talking about?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's a machine that you can actually see it working, and it's visual, and you.
Yeah, totally.
It makes a noise. It makes a lovely noise. Most of them have got beautiful whistles, and that's.
Yeah, true that.
There's just so many things about them.
It's kind of this really just mighty, almost like raging power that's sort of, well, you can control it, but it almost seems uncontrollable, untamed.
They're big, and there is a lot of power there, and they exude that power.
Yeah. So I guess obviously you got one and then kept buying more. Why didn't you just stop at one?
What I found, and originally that was the whole intention, just to have one steam locomotive. But then you find you've got to build a shed to house it, and you find it's easier to build a shed that's not only do you need a shed for locomotives, you've got to have machinery and cranes and lathes and that type of thing. But also I think you've got to go back to the motive of what one's trying to do. I was, I suppose, horribly disappointed when diesels came in and it became evident that we were going to lose these steam locomotives. And I started to see them being cut up all around the world. And even worse, it seemed to me that the railway companies tend to pick the best locomotives and cut those up, and what we call the dogs were left in the back of the sheds and weren't touched.
Yeah.
And I obviously had a profound effect on me. I could see something I was very passionate about.
Yeah.
I mean, I was supposed to describe it. I feel a wee bit the same about lions and tigers. Most magnificent animals, and yet we are destroying them to the stage where shortly they'll become extinct, apart from zoos and that type of thing. I mean, I'd love to see tigers here in New Zealand, but I think all the sheep farmers would take me out and lynch me. But I guess that's the way I can describe it. I feel about steam locomotives like I feel about lions and tigers. Such impressive, and elephants, such impressive animals, they are impressive, and that's how I feel about steam locomotives.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess once I started one, I guess it's like learning to type. Once you can learn one key, you start learning all the rest of them. And going with the steam engine, once you realise how you could save one, it wasn't very difficult to save another one. And another one. And it's been a lifetime journey, just not in New Zealand, but I've continued to do that. I've taken a huge interest in America and England, and I've been fortunate to be able to do some of that work in South Africa and saved a few locomotives in South Africa, which have the same gauge as we have. I bought 4 of them here from New Zealand, but I still have others in South Africa, where again, you can't do this on your own, and you get like-minded people. Like-minded people want to know what you're doing, and they get involved with you.
Absolutely.
And they become part of you, part of the team that's doing this work. Yeah.
So the team is another massive thing that fuels the passion. Sort of finding a community of like-minded people.
Yeah.
And
I don't want to sound like a religious sculptor. It's not like that, but like-minded people get together and. Don't get on with all of them, but you tend to find other people with similar views to yourself, and there's a lot of joy in that. There's a lot of joy in communicating with people of like minds.
Would you find that like leading a team to do these things has been rewarding?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, no doubt about it.
So I guess how it's kind of sounding to me is not really the question of why would you keep collecting them, but why not? Why wouldn't you? And I like how you use the word saving. It's like, well, if you save one, why wouldn't you save more? Why would you stop there?
Yeah, if you've got the means and the money and the time and the passion to do it.
Yeah.
I guess perhaps I can explain another way. I started my commercial career in selling and marketing. And there's 2 things I learned very quickly. If you're going to be successful, you've got to be a very positive person, and you've got to be a believer that you can make things happen. If you've got an attitude where, oh no, it's too hard, or no, that can't happen, if you've got that negative attitude, nothing will happen. But if you've got an attitude that I can do this, I can make this happen, that's where I come from. And I've been trained that way, and that's how I think, and I guess that's the story, yeah.
That's awesome. It's inspiring. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about your journey?
Well, one of the things that's pleasing is that, particularly with tourism, the engines that have been saved or are being saved, they are finding, I mean, one has to be brutally honest and say if I was running a commercial railway, I wouldn't be running it with steam, I'd be running it with diesel. But steam has a place for tourism right around the world, and it brings people in, and we run steam tours in New Zealand. We do them about once a year. We get a lot of English people, we get a lot of German people. Because it's unique, people will come, people with their interest will come from all around the world just to be involved in right behind your steam engines. So that's the positive. So I'm eternally optimistic that this will keep growing.
It will keep growing and steam will continue its resurgence.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that the engines that we've saved will have a bright future.
That's so fantastic. Wow, thank you so much again.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good.
Cheers.